All right. Seems to be working. Let me make sure that it says it on this computer. Okay, yeah. All right, Jim, we can get started.
Okay, welcome to this evening's presentation. John Turnak's latest book, New York Scoundrels, Scalawags, and Scrappers, the City in the Last Decade of the Gilded Age. I am Jim Mackin, only one of a dozen or so members of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. One of them is Michael Gonzalez, who you've already heard, and he'll facilitate our questions and answers. Use the chat, and he can also connect to you. We do local history in our neighborhood in the West 90s and West Hundreds on Manhattan's Upper West Side that was known as Bloomingdale from the late 1600s up to about 1900 or so. But I know many of you know the name is still around. We do presentations such as this one this evening, usually by Zoom. We also do monthly tours. We maintain a collection of historical papers at the Bloomingdale branch of the New York Public Library on West 100th Street. And we maintain a website that showcases all that we do. The website is upperwestsidehistory.org. But if you don't remember that, just Google Bloomingdale History, and that'll get you to us. Some treats on our website include a listing of all 1,100 buildings in our neighborhood and the dates they were built and the architects. A lot of blogs of historical tidbits about the neighborhood, interesting photographs. And you'll get our quarterly bulletin. We absolutely do not share your email with anyone, but we'll keep you abreast of local history. And tonight we feature an old friend of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group, John Turnak. John has written numerous books. I think I have them all, but Empire State Building, Manhattan Block by Block, a recent favorite, Manhattan's Little Secrets, uncovering mysteries in brick, mortar, glass, and stone. My favorite coffee book of all time, New York from the Air, A Story of Architecture. And if you don't mind paying $75, you can get a copy of John's famous 1979 subway map, best subway map ever by everybody's acclamation. But tonight he's going to tell us a little bit about his latest book, New York Scoundrels, Scalawags, and Scrappers, the City in the Last Decade of the Gilded Age. And just to entice your interest further with this, you can flip through the book and pick out buildings address by address. There's a bunch on the Upper West Side. And then with each building, there's a story that you could not have imagined. And that's what John features in his latest book. So I'm going to give it over to our good old friend, John Turnak. John?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you on this snowy night. I assume that you see a cover of the book on the screen. This is the cover of Scoundrels, and
give
the
me
art
1 second.
direction encapsulates the book. The photo shows the literal city. You see three gilded domes on the horizon. The tallest is the Siegel Cooper department store.
Wait, John, sorry. Give me 1 second. I'm having a little bit of an issue. Sorry, just give me 20 seconds to me.
You got him.
While we're waiting this 1 second, I forgot to add the little addition that if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, to please put them into the chat, as well as any comments or concerns, and then we'll be answering those through a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Let me
All that I ask is that the questions be easy.
John, I recollect that you grew up on the Upper West Side.
Yes, we moved to 410 Riverside when I was a teenager. And I basically lived between West 66th and 113th for most of my life. 50 plus years in the same building.
Did you have an interest in New York City from way back when?
Well, My father was in the hotel business.
Uh-huh.
Try to bring your car.
Now, I know I spoke with you a while back, and you
Can I be excused for 1 minute?
Oh,
sure.
1 minute.
He didn't plow yet, John, but I'll see what I can do.
apologies, everyone. We're having just a bit of a technical difficulty here.
When Michael gets us to John's PowerPoint presentation, you're going to see some really spectacular images that are in John's book. And again, it's my kind of book in the sense that beyond the buildings, there's stories behind them. I think for the last umpteen years, there's been so much attention on buildings, on architecture, and of course, we all love architecture and buildings. But here we go. Yeah, Michael got the images, and John will rejoin us shortly. And he was just starting to talk about the buildings in this image, the old Siegel Cooper department store down on what's called Ladies Mile, 6th Avenue between 14th and 23rd Street. John, we're good to go now.
Okay, splendid. So this is the cover of Scoundrels, and the art direction encapsulates the book. The photo shows the literal city. You see 3 gilded domes on the horizon. The tallest is the Siegel Cooper department store. The pair is atop the Hugh O'Neill store, and both buildings are still standing. The yellowed scruffy title area provides a hint of the other side of all the G-I-L-T, gilt, the G-U-I-L-T, gilt side, if you will. And we are announcing that we're changing the slide simply by saying slide. I begin the introduction by citing a politician named George Washington Plunkett, who was a member of Tammany Hall, the political clubhouse on 14th Street illustrated here. I say in the introduction that if you use the word venal only once in your life, and you use it to describe the shenanigans of Tammany Hall, you will have done the word justice. Slide. And here is State Senator George Washington Plunkett himself. It was Plunkett who famously said, "I seen my opportunities and I took them." Plunkett, the players in this book, also saw their opportunities and they too took them, or at least they tried. The average New Yorker went about his daily life playing by the rules of the game in the 1890s. Some might have cheated a little, but they were only scalawags. Other individuals, along with the managements of some businesses and political organizations, were the scoundrels. They played by totally different rules, successfully gaming the system to their advantage, to the disadvantage of countless others. And then there were the scrappers, who fought to change the system, to improve it, and every so often they succeeded. The average New Yorker, however, could have cared less, with no interest in rocking society's boat or the ship of state. The decade is specifically called the gay 90s, which was a bit of a misnomer. There was a high degree of gaiety, all right, but it was generally reserved for the top 10 percenters. If you were a common working stiff, or worse, a common working stiffette, life was not so gay. With that said, I begin each chapter with a photo of a building that still stands and is relevant to the story. That way I create a physical link between the city of today and the city of the 90s. In this talk, I'll occasionally cite a lead paragraph or two and slip into greater depth on some stories. Slide. Here's a diva's retreat, the former home of Lillian Russell. And I begin the chapter with, she was big, she was blonde, she was beautiful, as Mickey Spillane might have described Lillian Russell. Russell reigned as the highest star in the firmament of comic opera and operettas in the late 1880s and 1890s. She was so commanding a presence in her field that composers the quality of Reginald de Koven would write scores with her specifically in mind for the leading soprano roles. And her popularity was so great that hairdressers would advertise the Lillian Russell style, a coiffeur, I don't know how to pronounce that word, coiffeur, who would give their customers star quality hair. In 1893, her lead tenor, Signor Giovanni Perugini, aka John Chatterton, had studied voice in Italy and changed his name. Slide. Now we're past that one. We're past that one. No, not the fellow barber yet, to the color image of Lillian Russell. Yep. She was so commanding in her field that composers the quality of Reginald de Koven would write scores with her specifically in mind. In 1893, her lead tenor, oh, sorry, I've already read that. Lillian Russell had scarcely known Perugini before he joined the crew, but after only about 3 weeks, the fact that he was in her company started taking on a double meaning. On January 11th, 1894, the subhead in a Boston Globe story caught the essence of the real-life plot. Courtship on the stage proved real. The Hartford Courant said that Lillian Russell was beautiful to look upon and delightful to hear, with a comeliness of face and figure which nature so generously bestowed. And Perugini was no slouch. The Boston Daily Globe described him as a tall, good-looking 39-year-old with a black mustache and dark hair, and he had dark, languid eyes. The Atlanta Constitution said that he was extremely fetching and had a valorous manner. The Boston Globe gushed over the pair. Never had the lovely prima donna looked better, and Perugini was gorgeous. In one scene, he wore a white satin costume with lace at his throat and lace ruffles in his sleeve. Another costume was a suit the color of gold with a long cape of mauve that was lined with pale blue. It was Perugini who wanted to rush into marriage, and so they did. The morning after the wedding day, Perugini started making demands. Lillian Russell's faithful maid of 7 years had to go, but Russell prevailed on that one. On another, she did not. The marriage was not consummated on their wedding night, and not ever after. Despite Lillian Russell's fame and fortune, after marrying Perugini, she mysteriously found herself inexplicably broke. So broke that she was forced to mortgage her house, and soon after divorcing Perugini, to take out another mortgage. And then she was forced to sell it. I don't have a smoking gun, but soon after their engagement, Perugini had boasted to his friends at the Players Club that he had played a strong card. "I'm sure of a position for life," he said, "and I'll bet that you can figure out who the scoundrel was." Slide. For fans of Jane Austen, I begin this paragraph with this variation on a theme. It is a truth universally acknowledged that drinking on an empty stomach is inadvisable, something that the upstate Republican Senator John Raines took to heart. Never a publicly avowed prohibitionist, Raines nevertheless saw that a state law was enacted in 1896. Among other things, it mandated that if you wanted to have a drink at a bar, it simply couldn't be a drink or even a drink accompanied by some peanuts or a snack. It had to be accompanied by something more substantial. It had to be accompanied by a meal. The tradition of saloons offering what passed as a free lunch in exchange for a customer ordering a beer would be a thing of the past. But tavern owner Benjamin Singer told his bartender to ignore the Raines law. The bartender, who was only following his boss's orders, was arrested. The law was passed on April Fool's Day, and with its multiplicity of provisions, such as the fact that hotels could serve alcoholic beverages in their dining rooms on Sunday and all night long, created havoc. I end the chapter with this. Under the headline, Mischief of the Raines Law, the Times editorial board said that the consequences of the Raines Law would go to show how unwise it is to have laws so ill adapted to circumstances and conditions, so out of keeping with prevailing sentiment of the community that they cannot be clearly applied and readily enforced. Their worst effect is begetting these subterfuges and fostering the spirit of disrespect for law and public authority. I add, would that the framers of the Volstead Act had listened. Slide. We're already there. And here's Delmonico's restaurant, La Creme de la Creme. A restaurant is a machine for dining, and the restaurants flying the Delmonico colors in the 1890s were hands down the best oiled and smoothest operating machines for fine dining in New York City. Delmonico's was royalty, and they catered to royalty. Royalty by blood, such as the Duke of Marlborough, and royalty by achievement, such as Sarah Bernhardt, along with ordinary folks who just had money. Slide. And here is an 1893 view of Delmonico's, and incredibly, save the awnings and the rooftop railing, its facade has not changed one whit. The restaurant itself occupied the basement and two lower floors of this 8-story building, with the intermediate floors leased out as offices. And what was on the top floor? Well, remember that restaurant kitchens are notorious sweat boxes, and that's where the kitchen was, where a breeze from any of 3 exposures could be captured. The waiters would send up their orders by pneumatic tubes, and the food would be delivered to the dining areas by hydraulic elevators. Perhaps this arrangement was the answer to every chef's dream. There would be no waiter clamoring to know where the order was that he had put in 20 minutes before, no waiter complaining that table 12 was carping. Slide. By the late 1880s, Charles Delmonico Christ, a grandnephew of the founders and the last in the male line, legally changed his name to Charles Christ Delmonico, and he took over. Charles Delmonico oversaw all the branches, and despite his formal demeanor in this photo, Charles was called Charlie by everybody who was anybody. The day after the new Beaver Street branch opened in July 1891, the New York World announced, "Now you may dine again," and went on to say that if you wanted to see any kind of broker who has an office downtown, it was a 10-to-1 shot that you would find him afternoon yesterday at Charlie Delmonico's. Slide. Translating how much things cost to put things in perspective is a less than perfect art, but an 1890s dollar is roughly the equivalent of $36 today. However, even with that equation, some things in the 1890s seem to have cost less in comparison, others more, and some seemingly the same. Under fish as an appetizer, in this Delmonico's 1899 menu, we see soft shell crabs for $10 or the equivalent of 37. On the Delmonico's menu on July 18th, under appetizers, we see Maine crab cake for $37. Basically the same. Chefs at the best restaurants and hotels and in the homes of the wealthy were handsomely paid in the 1890s, better paid than congressmen, college professors, and New York City's mayor. The chef from William K. Vanderbilt was earning $12,000 a year, and chefs at prestigious restaurants easily made the same, perhaps even more, with all the perquisites that came with the job. And Charles Ranhofer was just such a chef. Ranhofer had a cookbook published in 1893. This was no ordinary cookbook. The title's first 14 words spelled it out. The Epicurean, a complete treatise of analytical and practical studies of the culinary art. At 1,183 pages, this Franco-American culinary encyclopedia was designed for the hautest of haute cuisine chefs. Slide. Ranhofer knew that seasonal offerings had to be considered when certain game was in season, for instance, and Ranhofer had page after page of tables of supplies, each page with 12 columns, one for each month of the year. And what do you see down at the bottom of the page for game? That's right, woodcock. It was out of season from February to the last 2 weeks of August. And what do you suppose Delmonico's was serving the month it opened in July 1891? Slide. You got it, woodcock. Yes, Delmonico's broke the law, and they were taken to court. The lawyers for the defense, Shipman, LaRocque, and Choate. Choate's sister, by the way, started the Choate School, basically said, woodcock, poppycock. A problem for the litigants was the district attorney who was to prosecute the case. This man, Delancey Nichol, an upper-class good old boy. Nichol was a member of the St. Nicholas Society, for instance, an association of males whose ancestors had been residents of the United States since the United States was. Nichol did not see to calendaring the case until March 1893, by which time, slide, Charlie Delmonico had inexplicably ignored the defense mounted by his own lawyers and had as good as conceded the case. Delmonico declared that it was his duty as a restaurateur and host to serve his customers whatever viands they desired, in season or out. He had always done so, he would continue to do so, and he might as well have added, damn the consequences. When the case finally went to trial, the defendant was encouraged to plead guilty, pay the fine, and be done with it, for a grand total of $450. Charlie Delmonico paid on the spot, with no comment from here. Slide. By December 1893, District Attorney Nichol had decided to retire, and 230 of the city's leaders gathered to honor him at a banquet. Although this photograph was taken several years after the fact, you get an idea of how the gathering might have looked. Not a woman in sight, by the way. The head of the City Bar Association declared that during Delancey Nichol's service as district attorney, there had never been a whisper that any man in the city was powerful enough to command Nichol or cunning enough to influence him against his convictions. And the room rang with an endorsement of the tribute. The space just happened to be the main dining room of Delmonico's, and it just went to show the power of the Delmonico name. Slide. Not only might Charlie Delmonico have been commanding enough to influence Nichol to stall on the Woodcock case, Delmonico was cunning enough to arrange to host the banquet, honoring the man who theoretically had been the restaurant's legal comeuppance. Slide. And here's today, almost gone yesterday, the City Hall story. And I begin it by saying that novelty was all the rage in the late 19th century. And by the late 1880s, the spirit of tearing down and building up was already rooted in the city's psyche. Everything was fair game in the demolition derby, and the glint in the wrecker's eyes was falling upon the venerable City Hall. City Hall, which was finished in 1811, when the city's population stood at about 100,000, had never been built to house a fraction of the bureaucracy required for a city of over 1.4 million. Over the years, however, City Hall had become a dumping ground, forced to house one more municipal agency atop another. Slide. To house its ever-expanding bureaucracy, by the 1880s, the city had started renting space in commercial buildings, such as the former A.T. Stewart department store. More space was still needed, and City Hall began to be regarded as an anachronism. To house it, City Hall was too small for its purposes, out of date, and out of luck. Slide. Various plans were put forward for a municipal building that would house the offices of City Hall and various municipal agencies on various sites. Plans that all fizzled. And, said the New York Tribune, Tammany had been persistently and disingenuously engaged in an attempt to prove that City Hall Park was the only site for a new building. City Hall, to use the politician's term, would be removed, and a new municipal building would be constructed on its site, with the work to begin by May 1st, 1893. Slide. An architectural competition was held that attracted countless overblown variations on the theme of Paris's Hotel de Ville, along with neo-Egyptian revival designs and neoclassical palaces topped by neo-Baroque domes. Plan after elaborate plan seemed larger than the one before, with more and more of the park, City Hall Park that is, gobbled up. Slide. City Hall Park was already crowded enough, and this image shows the old Hall of Records in the foreground, with City Hall beyond, and the post office off to the left. What it doesn't show, slide, is the courthouse north of City Hall on Chambers Street, the infamous Tweed Courthouse. Slide. This man, Andrew Haswell Green, was a scrapper. Green had led the Central Park Commission and was a longtime advocate of more parkland for the city, not less. Any of the proposed new structures would leave scarcely a square rod of green in the park, said Green. The need for parks for breathing spaces cannot be well disputed. Why shut up those already existing, he wrote. Slide. Then a true preservation movement began. A small but vocal group of proto-preservationists all agreed that a municipal building was needed to house the bureaucracy, but not at the expense of sacrificing City Hall. In February 1894, Andrew Haswell Green wrote a letter to the Municipal Building Commission arguing for the building's preservation. The design and construction of City Hall were as faultless as any structure in the city, he said, while its historical and biographical relations, i.e. its civic memory, which included the lying in the state of Abraham Lincoln, involve events of paramount interest and personages of dignity and estimation. Green believed that City Hall stood unsurpassed by any structure of its kind in the country, words that were picked up by the press. The Tribune interviewed 9 former mayors in March 1894, and 7 strongly endorsed the idea that City Hall should be preserved on its original site and perform its original function. Its historical associations and the high quality of its demanded nothing the high quality of its design demanded nothing less. High quality of design and historical associations are the essence of landmark legislation. And it was Andrew Haswell Green who was in large part responsible for starting the preservation movement. He enlisted John Winfield Scott, the state secretary of the Society of the Sons of the American Revolution, to join the fray. The society printed a pamphlet based on Green's thoughts, with copies delivered to state officials and periodicals. Scott then contacted about 1,500 organizations in the city, asking them to join the fight to preserve City Hall. Slide. Soon delegation after delegation from various local organizations was traipsing up to Albany to press their case. By late spring in 1894, lawyers for the Sons of the American Revolution had drafted a bill on behalf of the preservation movement for the state legislature to sign. The Times wrote that Albany might finally become convinced that New Yorkers did not want the removal of the present beautiful and time-honored structure. In May 1894, the legislature acted. A bill prohibiting City Hall's removal was passed. Slide. Mayor Gilroy traveled to Albany in the hope of dissuading Governor Roswell Flower from signing the bill. But the Democratic governor signed it anyway, and perhaps this frowning photo of the mayor was taken soon after. In terms of landmark preservation, it was a first in New York City, a fact that generally goes unheralded. Slide. This building is Grace Church, and the story is entitled To Have and to Bank On. The 1890s witnessed one American heiress after another being auctioned off to titled but impecunious bidders, although impecunious is a somewhat relative term. In 1893, William, the fourth Earl of Craven, married Cornelia Martin, and it's hard to believe that the Earl could really have been broke. Craven's annual income was reportedly about $400,000, but he found it difficult to maintain his style on it. Slide. Paying staff to maintain Coombe Abbey, his 500-acre country estate in Warwickshire, plus a townhouse on London's Berkeley Square, all while leading the good life, took money. And who knew how much he might get with an American bride? Slide. And Mr. and Mrs. Bradley Martin had some. By the 1880s, Bradley Martin was a successful lawyer and businessman and a club member. The Union, the Metropolitan, the Knickerbocker, you name it. His wife, Nellie Martin, was beginning to be described as a society matron, and she's the one who had the real money. In 1881, upon the death of her father, Isaac H. Sherman, who had turned down President Lincoln's offer of being the Secretary of the Treasury, she had inherited between $6 and $8 million. Since the mid-1880s, the Martins have been spending maybe only 4 months out of 12 in the city, with the balance abroad. Capital cities had their allure. They owned a townhouse in London, but they lingered the longest on Loch Ness in Scotland, at Balmacan, a 65,000-acre hunting preserve that they rented. To put things into perspective, 65,000 acres is about 4.5 times the size of Manhattan Island. One of Cornelia's brothers had become chummy with Craven, and the Earl was a guest at Balmacan during the fall hunting season of 1892. When the 24-year-old arrived at Balmacan, Cornelia Martin was only 15. She turned 16 by the end of the hunting season, by which Craven had proposed. I didn't have to say slide. To the senior Martins, the Earl was a real catch, and upon news of the engagement, Ward McAllister, the social arbiter, said it was a fine match. To the press, however, the match struck some bad chords. By the time the Earl was 18, he was already a prominent figure in society and a favorite topic for the press. The mere fact that the Earl was not gadding about, but simply staying quietly at home, would be enough to earn mention in the society columns. Here is Cornelia in about 1900, when she would have been in her mid-20s. Cornelia Martin at 16 was such an innocent that she had only started dining with the adults at the dinner table that summer. Complicating the social angle, she had not been presented to society. Few members of the American upper crust knew her, and even fewer of England's. The whole affair was so strange that when the Times received the cable reporting the engagement, the newspaper believed that it was a mistake, quote, owing to Miss Martin's youth and the ideas that have generally prevailed in society here regarding the Earl of Craven's manner of life and associations. The ceremony of grace, which for my money is the finest Gothic revival church in the city, was scheduled to be held on April 18th, 1893. However, the 7 immediate members of the Martin party, which included the prospective groom and his brother, plus 10 servants, did not return from Scotland until March 29, with the wedding scheduled to take place barely 3 weeks off. This photo was taken a little later, but it shows the scene at the Cunard docks. The baggage the Martins arrived with consisted of 128 items, with trunks filled with the finest of clothes, among them a Worth gown of white satin with lace trim for the bride, and a Worth gown of light gray silk for the mother of the bride. Knowing that Cornelia Martin was soon to be married, the customs officials expected to collect duty on her trousseau. To their surprise, Mr. Martin declared that there was only one object that could be subject to duty, and it was a portrait of his son by an unnamed artist. He valued it at 10,000 francs. A portrait of Cornelia by Carol S. Duran already hung on the Martins' walls. If the new painting had cost anywhere near what Duran might have charged, Martin was lowballing the figure. An inspector asked about Miss Martin's trousseau, to be told that it was in the castle in Scotland. When asked about her wedding dress and whether she had at least brought it, Mr. Martin acknowledged that indeed she had. But he then added that his daughter had worn it. The standard for paying duty on garments was whether they were new and unworn. If they had been worn, there was no duty, and Mr. Martin elaborated. He said that his daughter had worn the gown to several receptions, and the inspector felt obliged to accept Mr. Martin's statements. He had, after all, signed an affidavit and was under oath, and the assumption was that he would not lie. Gossip started flying about whether Cornelia Martin would wed the Earl in a gown that in the eye of society had been soiled and was hardly virginal, or, heaven forfend, whether she would be obliged to have a wedding gown made for her in her native land. The authorities had not been exactly satisfied with Bradley Martin's explanation to begin with, and all the resulting gossip set the customs officials to reconsidering the situation. The consequent investigation went nowhere, and somehow the Martins managed to walk away without paying a dime to the government. Slide. Grace had 206 pews, and at some stage in the game, the Martins had come to own one of them. Pews of Grace did not come cheap. Pew number 121 on the middle aisle, for instance, had sold in 1886 for $200, with an annual ground rent of $90. For the Martins to have owned a pew, or even to have been regular churchgoers, is a source of wonder, since before the wedding could take place, an oversight had to be remedied. Cornelia Martin had never been confirmed in the Episcopal Church, and the vestigial Church of England in America thought it only appropriate that she be so. Only a few days before the nuptials, and seemingly with only the briefest of catechism, Cornelia Martin was formally received into the church by the Reverend Dr. William Reed Huntington, the rector, and assisted by no less than Bishop Henry Potter, Grace's former rector. The novitiate was hardly attired in the traditional white for her confirmation. She wore an afternoon driving dress of black cloth and a black hat trimmed with black plumes. The team that confirmed the bride would officiate. Back to the color image of Grace, please. One slide back, yes. For the Martins to have owned a pew, or even to have been regular churchgoers, is a source of wonder, since before the wedding. Oh, I've already read that. I'm sorry. Forward to, yes. The florist selected to decorate the church was Charles Thorley, the florist for the 400. And here's his shop on the northwest corner of Fifth Avenue and 46th Street. Thorley's forte was arranging floral motifs on a large scale, horticulture as interior decoration, and he outdid himself for this wedding. Come the wedding day, and the view up the central aisle was a floral extravaganza, a path bordered by white Scotch heather and lilies of the valley. The altar was trimmed with roses and lilies set against banks of daisies and 40-foot-high palms. At 1 o'clock, the organist struck up the wedding march from Lohengrin, and the bride walked up the aisle, escorted by her father. She did indeed wear the famously soiled gown, which had been dressed up for the occasion by a few orange blossoms. Within about 13 minutes of Cornelia Martin's arrival at the altar, the 16-year-old had become the Countess of Craven, said Town Topics, the gossipy magazine of society. The tilted-nosed Countess appeared to be the most unhappy bride extant. It was just before Cornelia Martin's wedding that Mr. and Mrs. Bradley Martin stopped being known simply as Mr. and Mrs. Bradley Martin, or the Martins. Those mundane descriptions were not highfalutin enough. The family name would have more panache by merging Mr. Martin's given name with the family name and separated by a hyphen. So the family would be henceforth known as the Bradley Martins. It meant, of course, that Mr. Bradley Martin had become Mr. Bradley Martin, but that seemed to faze no one. The new Bradley Martin name was already found in print just before the wedding. Next slide. And by 1897, when the Bradley Martins hosted a fancy dress ball in the Waldorf ballroom, the hyphenated name was firmly in the family's firmament. The servants and musicians at the ball were all costumed in the court dress of 17th and 18th century France. Their costumes, of course, all paid for by the Bradley Martins, and the guests were to appear in the attire of Louis XIV and XV. Begowned Fifth Avenue dowagers impersonated 30-year-old Marie Antoinette, and late 19th century men dressed up as 17th or 18th century French fops. The costumes were custom made for the occasion, and they did not come cheap. Frederick Townsend Martin, a brother of the host, reputedly paid $500 for a Louis XV court costume. Miss Helen Bryce, a daughter of former Senator Calvin Bryce, was a Marie Antoinette. Her costume had been made in France and was said to have cost $2,000. Multiply that by 36. The skinny on how much the ball cost the Bradley Martins varied wildly, but some of the expenses included $6,700 for some of the attendants' costumes, $12,000 for the supper, $6,000 for the buffet, $1,000 for the ballroom, $500 for the small ballroom, and $20,000 for cotillion favors, which were vaguely described as pretty articles in silver. The nation was suffering a financial depression in 1897, and Napoleon was said to have urged his nobles to spend lavishly to circulate their money among the poor during lean economic times. And the Bradley Martins might have liked to think that they were being Napoleonic. The rationale that was concocted to defend all this conspicuous consumption was that the money spent would be money put back in circulation. Hence, the suffering of the suffering would be alleviated. The trickle-down theory of economics would benefit the likes of fancy shoemakers and florists, tailors and dressmakers for sure. And some of that money would find its way into the pockets of the wage earners. A problem with the theory is that there were about 100,000 idle men in the city, and since the trickle-down theory only applied to those who had jobs, none of the unemployed would benefit from the ball. The frustration that was soon being vented by the poor intimidated many invitees, and some started to drop out, fearing that bombs might be thrown through the Waldorf windows. All the negative publicity had made the ball, quote, of much wider interest than it otherwise would have been, said the Times, and pointed out that correspondents of London newspapers had been requested to cable full and long stories of the event. The Bradley Martin's theory of spreading it around did result in making the financial playing field a little more level, but hardly as they had anticipated. As a result of all the publicity, the Bradley Martins' double-wide house at 22 West 20th Street, where they would host midweek dinners, would be reappraised for the city's tax roll. Having clearly gypped the Customs Department of Revenue, another government agency, the New York Department of Taxation, would get it back and then some. The Bradley Martin's house would be reappraised by the city's tax roll. The Bradley Martins consequently decided to turn their backs on it all. Not only was the local municipality vindictive, but the local social steam in New York did not hold a candle to the social steam in Europe. They were decamping for England, where, as the parents of Countess Craven, they might get some respect. Throughout all this, the Bradley Martins had maintained their pew at Grace Church, at least until Mrs. Bradley Martin's death in 1921. The value of the pew was assessed at $1,500, and presumably they were still paying the ground rent. And here we are in Shop Talk, New York Siegel Cooper store, the younger and larger sibling of Chicago's store of the same name, opened with a bang on the evening of September 12, 1896. The store held what management dubbed as a dress rehearsal, and nearly 150,000 of the curious showed up to inspect the building. Next slide. One of the most highly touted attractions of Siegel Cooper was the fountain, which threw 4 jets of water around a statue that stood on a marble pedestal in the middle of an ornamental pool, with electric lights changing the tint of the spray. The focal point was the statue, and the statue was not any old statue. Slide. It was a 13-foot high copy of Daniel Chester French's 65-foot high statue of the Republic that had graced the Court of Honor at Chicago's Columbian Exhibition. A national statue that at the time was perhaps second in fame only to the Statue of Liberty. Slide. Slide. And the fountain and statue were critically placed right in the center of the main floor. Slide. Slide. Oh, you got it. Sorry. And Meet Me at the Fountain became the store's calling card. Only about 35,000 made it through the doors for the dress rehearsal. The 115,000 who were turned away were kept quietly in line by the New York City Police Department. Hang on a sec. I'm just chugging down some water. Wise in the ways of doing the correct thing politically, management handed off a check of $250 as a slight expression of their esteem to the Policemen's Benefit Association for the benefit of retired and disabled members. Siegel Cooper is a great example of the 1890s, if only because it manifested so many of the elements of the decade. Management might have contributed to the retirees of the police department, but they offered no retirement benefits to their employees. And there was no paid vacation, and working hours averaged about 60 hours a week, and there was a double standard in pay. The so-called shop girls got about half as much as their male counterparts. Slide. The store was expected to be on a paying basis within the first year, and one of the reasons was purchasing power. They had volume. By centralizing the buying for both the New York and Chicago stores, they would more than double their purchasing power, so they could lower their retail prices even more. Siegel Cooper went so far as to establish their own manufacturing business, such as the Siegel Brothers Underwear Company at 65 Worcester Street. The store would be supplied to cost with no middleman, no markup. Small-time retailers never could compete, and with the coming of the New York store and some of their own manufacturing plants, even large stores started being outgunned. To further an environment that was already advantageous, the Siegel Cooper management hired buyers who were experts in their lines, as well as conversant with the inside workings of all the older New York stores and their sources of supply, reported the Times. The organization would be able to tap the competition's sources, and with its bulk buying, it could undersell anyone else and still make as much profit as the competition with its higher retail prices. The standards for keeping your job are rigid, and it's not as if the employees had not been forewarned. The standards were printed there for all to read. Under things not to do, many of the store's basic 12 commandments, their thou shalt nots, might have resulted in fines or termination. Although the specifics were not spelled out, many of the commandments seem to have been aimed specifically at the store's female employees. No gossiping, no flirting, etc. There were supplements to the verboten 12. Try to be included, serious in your work, punctual, obliging, painstaking, and being polite and neat, and to dress in black. The dress code was clearly aimed at women, with no mention of how male employees were to attire themselves. And here's the music counter. Yes, next is the bargain counter. Even with prices that bested other stores, Siegel Cooper still had a bargain counter. It would be frequently crowded with customers, and here, interestingly, the shop girls were wearing white blouses, and for the most part, they were young. Few were older than 25, in large part because they burned out. What to do with aging employees? Next slide, please. What to do with aging employees whose skills were perceived as waning posed a problem. According to Frank Cooper, the diminution of powers in earnest began at age 50 for men. Rather than firing faithful managers who were over the hill, the managers would be reassigned, given a less important position. The problem was the definition of less important. In Cooper's eyes, it translated into being a night watchman, for instance. Frank Cooper was 54 when he made his pronouncements on aging. A fellow partner, Gerson Siegel, who had overseen the construction of the 6th Avenue store, had been 56 when the door opened, and he was pushing 60 and still an active vice president at his death in 1899. The store itself did not have great longevity, as the Yankee catcher Yogi Berra said of playing the outfield, it got laid out there early. And for Siegel Cooper, it got laid out there early on 6th Avenue. The store was out of business by 1917, 21 years after it opened. And with that, I believe our time is up. If you have any easy questions for me, I'll try to answer them.
John, let me thank you immensely on behalf of the Bloomingdale Neighborhood History Group. You've done such wonderful presentations for us in the past. I think you've topped yourself on this one. And I'll whet people's appetites even further. John's got so many other interesting chapters. There's one about Stuyvesant fish, which is especially interesting, about the New York Horse Exchange that becomes the Winter Garden Theater. Isaac Rice, we all know in our neighborhood, the Isaac Rice Mansion at 91st and Riverside Drive, but there's some other history that John picks up. The theme of the Gilded Age makes for just wonderful stories, John, that you've collected, so we really appreciate that. And now Michael will entertain any questions that we have in the chat or otherwise.
Yeah, for anybody who's here wants to ask any questions, feel free to place them in the chat, or if you're willing to ask them yourself, just raise your hand and we'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask them directly.
In the meantime, Jim, thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much.
All right, I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can see each other's a little bit better. Here we go. Okay. Yeah, so if anyone has any questions you want to ask directly, you can just raise your hands and we'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask it directly. If not, you can continue place anything in the chat as well.
Oh, goody, no questions.
Well, I think this portends that people are going to get the book, buy it, or a library or whatever, because the stories are amazing. As much as I knew about Siegel Cooper and the statue, the Daniel Chester French copy, always intrigued me. And you've written the most about it that I've seen. But that's only one example of the real fun of the book. I couldn't put it down. I think I read it in one sitting. No.
Well, thank you. Carol Willis at the Skyscraper Museum was intrigued by my story on the Park Row building.
Oh, yeah.
Which was the tallest building in the world when it went up.
Yeah. Which features in that cult classic in New York City. You know what I'm talking about. That starts out in the Dakota apartment building. The guy that goes guy goes back in time.
Yes.
Okay, so we do have one question here. A question about the cover of the book, and wanted to know why some of the buildings are in red and some others are not. Is there a reasoning to that?
I have to assume it's red brick.
Got it. That makes sense.
I mean, it doesn't look, the red buildings don't look like brownstone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's brown.
Yeah. It's interesting with Siegel Cooper, of course, you could walk into it today. But if you stand on either 18th or 19th Street, you get a sense of the incredible size of it.
Yes, and until maybe, I remember going in about 20 years ago, and you could still see the ring in the center of the main floor where the statue and surrounding colonnade had been.
Wow. 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 Wait, if you go into Grace Church, can you see any of the names you reference there?
You won't find the protagonists' names. I looked.
On the pews?
You'll still find silver plaques of former owners.
Okay.
Uh, I, I think that Grace is seriously the best Gothic revival church in town.
Wow.
You know,
Wow.
I mean, Renwick.
Yeah.
Where is the Seagull building located?
Pardon me?
Where is the Seagull building located?
Between 16th and 18th on the east side of 6th Avenue.
Got it. And then do you know what became of the Seagull Cooper statue?
Uh, it is in that large cemetery in Los Angeles. What is that large
Forest lawn.
forest lawn?
Yeah, right.
Forest lawn.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's funny, here in New York City, we send a lot of statues to Greenwood, but who knew that the Daniel Chester French copy that was originally in Cooper Seagull would wind out in Los Angeles? That may be your next book, John, finding out where various things wind up.
Well, it's interesting. I'm not going to give away the idea for my next book, but I've started working on an idea.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
My agent isn't thrilled with it, but c'est la vie.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, I'll give everyone one last chance to ask questions, but if not, just a reminder that tonight's talk has been recorded, and if anyone who is interested or might be interested in the talk should be able to find a recording of it on our history group website. That's the upperwestsidehistory.org, and I'll put it into the chat as well.
Excellent. And I'll just remind everyone we have a neighborhood tour coming up on the afternoon of Sunday, December 21st. At our last monthly tour, November 16th, we had more than 30 people.
And that can also be found on the website in case anyone needs information. Yep. And we probably won't be seeing all of you until next year. So actually, this is make sure to keep an eye out for our, let's see, for our newsletter that'll be coming out in the winter, and any email updates about the upcoming talks coming up in January as well.
Great.
Oh, one last question to close this out. Where did Isaac Sherman's money come from?
Sorry, again?
Isaac Sherman? Do you know where his money came from? The grandpa of Cornelia?
IHS. No. But
No worries.
But I said IHS, which is a religious, I forget what it means. I used to think it meant in his spirit, but it doesn't. But the family went to Europe, and there were many convent sales going on, and they came back with a tapestry, and down in the bottom it had IHS, and one wag looked at it and said, "Oh, wasn't it nice for her father to have had his initials woven into this tapestry?"
Well, on that note, again, John, we thank you so much. We look forward to having you back with your next book.
Thank you.
Yeah, and enjoy the research. And I'm sure you're going to dazzle us with some. If your agent doesn't like it, then it's going to be something special.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.